I'm Beck. Welcome to my September wrap up. These are all of the books that I read and also didn't read during the month of September. By didn't read, I mean I DNF'd a few, which is did not finish. So let's get into all of the books that I may or may not have read during the month. Firstly, I got a library hold which really surprised me, and that is Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Cochrane. And this one is accidentally a Christmas book, which I read in September, so oopsie on my behalf because they were in the snow and I am in spring when the sun's coming out, so the vibe of the season didn't really match, but it was still a really wholesome story. And of course I can't remember the main character's name. It's about our protagonist who is a bi-demisexual woman, and over the course of one day she meets this other woman and they spend all of Christmas Eve together and they form a relationship basically in a day that is quite tender, and then after a one night stand they leave each other. And it's now Christmas on the following year, and this character is completely and utterly broke. She's basically just lost her job. She's got nowhere to live because she can't afford rent anymore. And then enter a very wealthy, I don't want to say billionaire, but for the sake of the plot, I'll say billionaire. He propositions our main character and says, "You need the money. I need to be married in order for my grandfather's trust fund to be paid out to me. Let's work together because you're broke and I'm desperate." And this guy turns out to be the brother of the woman that this girl previously slept with. And they have to spend an entire week of Christmas together at this snow lodge for this family. So you can imagine the kind of chaos this forced proximity ensues. And I think the love interest constantly smelled like bread, and honestly, if anyone smelled like bread 24/7, I would fall in love with them too. Although the negative things about this book were that there was the lying trope to protect somebody, which I really hate. Put all your cards on the table and then work it out from there. That frustrates me in romance books, especially because you're supposed to be trusting your partner. And then for some reason, even though these characters are adults, thinking factually and strategically suddenly escapes them, which also very much frustrates me. I'm like, dude, come on, scope out the situation from all angles and make a decision like a real human being. So sometimes making someone a bit dumb for the plot to work annoys me, and also major plot things that should be fairly intimate happening in front of a crowd kind of gets me as well. So I initially had this as a 4 stars. I'm not sure if I necessarily want to keep that rating. It really does suit 3.5 now that I've reflected on the things I don't like about it. I think I was riding a high when I initially read it, but I think this will be a 3.5. And this author wrote The Charm Offensive as well, and I gave it about a similar rating. I just don't like big things happening in front of crowds, I guess, and I like a bit more intimacy and a bit more communication. So while this author is enjoyable to me, and I'm glad I tried something else by her, which was a female-female romance instead of a male-male romance, it was fun, I enjoyed it, but I don't know necessarily how eager I am to continue with Alison Cochrane's work. Then during the month, I was having a bit of a challenge because I was finding reading books that I was enjoying really difficult. I think I finished the amount of books that I also put down this month as well. So having a fairly even split doesn't usually happen. So I had a very big rise in DNFs this month, and that includes The Shadow Cabinet, which I included in a reading vlog. And the goal of that vlog was basically to read books that are the same color to make my reading motivation kickstart again. And by putting this book down, I really felt more free. And this one is the sequel to Her Majesty's Royal Coven, and it follows witches in the modern day who are independent and also a government faction, and they're kind of fighting against each other after a war that happened a decade ago. And because of the different character movements at the end of book 1 and then into book 2, a lot of people loved that plot twist. I personally hated it and it felt undermining to me. So I tried to continue reading this, but I got about 125 pages into it and I'm like, I'm just hating it more and more. Check out my vlog for more thoughts because I do ramble a little bit about this one, including specific spoilers which are very clearly flagged. So if you want to know the specific reason, check out that vlog. But yeah, I'm disappointed that I didn't love this one because I was really hoping that witches in the modern day with queerness as well would be super up my alley, but just the execution of this one was way off. And yeah, I'm just glad I put it down. I'm also quite surprised that I put this one down as well because I really wanted to love Battle Mage, but I got 20% into it and I was like, this feels like a boys club and I'm not enjoying myself. There was actually a line in here that said something to the effect of X's character's sphincter muscles clenched upon hearing the King's declaration. And I was like, is that really necessary? It was written like that all the way through, which made it feel really crass, and it felt very alienating because it wasn't written in like a third person relative or a first person perspective at all. The voices felt very similar across all of the characters, and because of this crass nature, it would make me kind of go, oh, every now and then as well. So I think all of those elements combined made me think I'm not enjoying it. And I honestly couldn't care less about where the story is going. It felt very clunky in terms of building up the world. And it's so disappointing because I was so invested in the beginning when we had just one character who was like a veteran who basically took on this group of people who came and pillaged the town earlier and he killed them all. And I was like, this dude sounds awesome, and he also used a bezoar to make sure he didn't get poisoned. And I'm like, clearly he has this knowledge, so I would really like to explore his perspective. But when it continued and then it introduced other perspectives, I wasn't interested anymore. So that's a little bit disappointing. A relief in the long term that I'm not adding a trilogy to my to be read pile, but still kind of disappointing when I was really hoping to love this one. Then, kind of unlike me, I read a young adult book, and that is Gwen and Art Are Not in Love. The release date for this book is all over the place. I could get this like months ago, but apparently it's re-releasing or releasing in November in some places. So I'm not sure who can and can't have this at the moment, but if you can get it, I would recommend it because I really enjoyed this one. It's about a retelling of Guinevere and Arthur, but it's kind of adjacent and somewhat removed because it's not a direct retelling. It's very much viewed in this book as almost a joke that these characters' families take the Arthurian legends quite seriously, and Gwendolyn is the main character's name, but Arthur at one point teases her and she's like, yeah, well, my parents thought Guinevere was a bit too on the nose. So I think because it was so self-aware and it had such snappy, engaging and hilarious dialogue, a lot of the dialogue I read out to Dave and he was also laughing and he had no context for the story. So because it had all of that going for it, I think I really liked it. The only time it didn't stick the landing for me was the politics because it felt very much peripheral, but then they became more of a focus later on, and I don't feel like that was developed keenly enough for me to be intrigued by it. So when it became more of a focus later, I was like, I prefer the character interplay over the politics because they weren't built up simultaneously as strongly as I was hoping for. But I liked all of the banter. I liked the trust and the mental health discussion in here with anxiety and depression. And I just overall really enjoyed this story. It was a romp. I read it so quickly and I really enjoyed myself. And this was also in that reading vlog that I mentioned as well. Then I did something else that was also not very like me because I've said so many times, I've banged on about the fact that I don't really read nonfiction, but I read a few this month. One of them was I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, and it's about borderline personality disorder and how borderline personality disorder is often missed. There were a lot of asides in this book with different stories and examples and anecdotes, but as a society we don't recognize borderline personality disorder, so it was a great touch point to learn a bit more about that because some of the symptoms of borderline are actual other disorders like depression, anxiety, and an eating disorder. So treating that eating disorder or that mental health problem won't actually treat BPD itself from the source. You're just kind of putting a band-aid on a broken leg. So from my viewpoint, because I'm really interested in general in mental health, trauma, and relationships and connection, it was a great starting point. I wouldn't say that it was a mind-blowing, incredible experience, and I haven't actually given this a rating because it didn't feel right to give it a star rating for enjoyment when I was learning like more factual information. But I think I really benefited from listening to this book because now in every interaction I have, I'm going about it in a way that doesn't seem preachy, whereas before you might read into what I'm saying and I'm not saying it at you, but I'm saying it with you or in support of you. But it's interesting when we're texting a lot and messaging a lot because a lot of our tone is lost, so things can easily get misconstrued. So now I'm starting to check myself even more when I message friends just to make sure I'm being perceived in the way that I'm intending to be. So in that sense, it was quite valuable because it's made me, I guess, interrogate my interpersonal relationships from myself and become a bit more self-aware of how I'm interacting with people. Not that I was a bad person generally, but it's just nice to know that there are little bits and pieces that you can tweak and improve on. And I think that book really helped me do that. So it was also a great learning experience in terms of technical language and technical information, but it was applicable to me every day as well, which is what I want in a nonfiction book. Then I finally read some stuff on my to be read cart. You'll be proud of me. I read a Terry Pratchett book, and that is Sorcery. I gave this one a 3.5 stars, and that's because this one unexpectedly just randomly made me laugh. I think one of the quotes that just completely got me by surprise was, "I think, therefore I am a hat." It was just so seamlessly delivered that it made me almost burst burst out laughing on a train. This book also made me realize that a lot of the writing in this book could be technically its own character, because a lot of the time I found that I cared about the writing and understanding its nuances and its very sardonic jokes that are just very much woven in there as seeming like a normal observation, but actually it's a little bit of an aside at the same time. So the writing felt very much like a character. And I think in his earlier works, that's what Dave said anyway, because he's read a bunch of Terry Pratchett. In his earlier works, the plot isn't as strong, and that changes later on when obviously he's grown more as a writer. So I think I would benefit much more from reading his later works than I would reading these ones. But the audiobooks were still a great experience and I quite enjoyed them, especially with the humor in this one. That's what really pulled it through for me. This one is a Rincewind story, and Rincewind is one of the reoccurring characters, but I think I read everything out of order by accident. This one is about Rincewind at the same time as it's also got a wizard in it who had 7 sons, and then an 8th son is a sorcerer. So it's loosely about magic, the magical academy, and Rincewind being involved in all of that, but accidentally also joining a thief somehow. So the plot is just a little bit out there. I wouldn't read this for the plot, I would read this for the writing style, which is why I did the audiobook, because it was a lot more engaging. Then I tried an audiobook by Tessa Bailey, and that is Unfortunately Yours, which is the purple cover. And this one follows Natalie, who is the sister of the love interest in the first book. And Natalie has come back to her family's winery, and she's trying to make a name for herself again because she's basically broke. She lost her job in New York. So now that she's back in her hometown, she's got a little bit more of that foundation, but she's taking a while to realize it. And she's also got this romance with August. And again, this is a story like in the Alison Cochrane book where characters want to get married for money, and to get that money in the trust fund, they need to be married. So Natalie needs the money from her dad's trust fund. And she's like, well, I need that to start my own business so that I can then thrive. So she's like, hey, August, we met in book 1 very briefly. Let's get married so that I can get the money. And he kind of needs money too, because he's starting his own like small business in honor of his friend who passed away. But what gets me about these stories is that if you are set up to have an arranged marriage together, you're interacting with each other and building feelings for each other. And it's very evident in your interactions. Why not just tell each other? And there was a moment too where Natalie asked August a question and he directly lied to her to protect her feelings. And I was like, no, this is too much. Like the boundary was walked very much in the Alison Cochrane book, but it was completely and utterly crossed in this book. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I put it down at 60%. I thought I could stick to the end and it wouldn't bother me too much. But when August lied to her face, I was like, no, I wouldn't want my partner to lie to me like that. I'm completely disillusioned. It's not going to happen anymore. So I returned it to the library with much frustration. This is the other Rincewind book that I also read out of order, and that is The Light Fantastic, and I only got 6% into it. And I kept tuning in and out of it because, like I said before, his earlier works don't seem as engaging to me. I did like Guards, and Men at Arms more than these, and even still those books were about 3.5 for me. So my engagement is really wavering, and I found when I was listening to this one it wasn't as funny as the other book. So this is Rincewind book 2 and the other one I think is Rincewind book 3. So I read this in the wrong order for starters. So it was really the writing and the engagement of the story for me. It wasn't as funny. The writing was not as strong of a character in this one. So I just found that it wasn't entertaining me and I was tuning out, so I returned it early. Then I read another non-fiction book, and that is She's on the Money, because I was like, I want to organize my finances and I have no idea where to start. So this really gave me a basis of rough understanding. But Victoria, the author, is a psychology and finance major, and she's a financial advisor. And so she was saying women need more understanding and power in terms of their money. Like, what is your money story? How are you raised to think about money? What are your habits that you don't realize? Do you keep telling yourself that you're broke? Because the more that you tell yourself you are broke, the more you're going to reinforce that to yourself. So start breaking habits you don't even realize are there. Here are some strategies of how to do so. And here is an overview of what some terms are, so you have more of an understanding of the lingo of the financial industry. So it's really made me want to just go out and make a whole bunch of lists. Honestly, just so excited. You can probably tell that I really enjoyed this one. I would, recommend it for sure. It is an Australian book, so some of the terms in here are referencing specifically Australian things, but I think it's still understandable and worthwhile regardless of where you're living, because it'll give you some rough overview of what you want to do and where you want to start and what you are interested in versus what you aren't. want and what you want to prioritize. Like, this book was perfect for me, but because it's nonfiction, I also didn't rate it. And the last thing in September that I ended up reading was The Power by Naomi Alderman. This one is a dystopian book, but it's our world tipping into a dystopia. And it's about how the power is awoken in different women. And this power is electricity, and it's how the dominance goes from patriarch to matriarch. But I think the way this did the themes, it had way too much going on. So it didn't feel like it could balance anything with enough gravity to each section and make it meaningful in terms of our character taking you by the hand and leading you through these themes. I found it was quite disconcerting in some points. It was unnecessarily graphic and gruesome in others, and I just wish I enjoyed it more, but I really struggled to latch on to some of the characters, and I didn't care about a lot of the themes and situations. So there was religion, there was politics, gender, sexuality, and physical power. And so I appreciated all of the different angles of how power can manifest and who is responsible for it, but I didn't care about the execution of how things played out. And there was something set up early with one of the characters and hearing a voice, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great world building, and then it didn't go anywhere. So ultimately this book just disappointed me, and I gave it 2 stars, which is super upsetting. I was like, this is going to be a 5-star book. Look at this, look at the premise. It sounds like The Handmaid's Tale meets X-Men. What is not to love about that? Yeah, turns out I was completely wrong, and I regret buying this because it wasn't that great. So that's how I'm going to end this wrap up, which is very disappointing. I am currently working on a personal project to read a bunch of stuff on my TBR cart to see if anything on my reading pile is what I probably shouldn't be keeping, because The Power made me go, hang on, I think I need to reevaluate here and decide if the things I've got are the things I want. So I'm kind of trying to get that sorted at the moment. So hopefully next month I don't have as many DNFs, but we'll see. I think I might. But let me know what you have been reading, because I need some great recommendations. I clearly am struggling to find some great reads. And if I did that challenge that everyone's doing, which is read until you find a 5-star book, I think it would just be a vlog that takes me the entire year, which is why I haven't done it. So anyway, that is all of the things that are relevant to my September wrap up. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.